flicks his dog on her. She bites the dog.
Don't bite my dog!
And the dog becomes her bitch. Yeah, I love it. We cut to French's house, getting an idea of the type of home life he has.
You good? Everything good?
My butthole stinks, but yeah.
The doctor checked it out for you.
We also see why he was at the house. Now, at one point or another, I say, I love this character, for pretty much everybody in the show at one point or another. Angie is probably the first one where I say it right off the bat.
There's no Euclid on my tits, you fucking freak.
That's my water?
She tells the others that instead of trying to get out, they need to try and stay awake during Hap's experiments.
I think she got brain damage.
As she gets up and cleans her
football
face,
injury, Homer says he's going to call someone.
Who are you gonna call?
Who are you gonna call? God, that phrase is never gonna be usable again, is it?
Doubt it.
Homer threatens to call the FBI, but
on his way out of the hospital, Hap stops to give the morgue keycard to a nurse and tells her,
There are people there that need help.
Sir? Sir, what do you mean people?
back in his lab.
out of it. When she fails that, she makes the best excuse ever to hang up a call.
I gotta go. I'm eating a sandwich.
Gilchrist, knowing she's...
We've made it. The last episode for Part 1. PyroDrake here with the OAnalysis for the last episode in Part 1, Invisible Self. This is the third script I've written for this episode, as I wasn't pleased with how the other two came out, hence the long gap between episodes. Toppled with some health issues, and it seemed like this episode wouldn't ever come out. Anyways, with the excuses out of the way, let's get started. The last line from the previous episode was,
Are you ready?
so this episode continues our story where it left off in Forking Paths. That is, with the officer Stan pressing his gun to the back of Hap's head while he listens to the Rings of Saturn play through his headphones. Stan tells Hap to stand so he can cuff him, and Hap realizes this may be it. So he throws his own Hail Mary.
What if I told you that I could cure ALS? You got a silver tongue, and you'd say anything. I don't want to hear it.
Hap offers to help Evelyn, Stan's wife, and tells him if they can't do it, Stan can lock him up. If they can, Stan is to turn his back and walk away. He even gives Stan the same line he got from his colleague, Leon.
There's no such thing as good and evil, black and white. There's only gray. There's only what a man can stand.
It seems something Hap said got through to Stan, as instead of driving to the station, he goes to his house and picks up Evelyn. Once they get back to Hap's house and the captives see an officer with a gun walking Hap downstairs... Oh my god! Oh my god! Unfortunately for them, Stan puts his wife above the lives of the other captives. Hap takes Homer and away and tells them they need to heal his wife. From his gaze, we can tell that weighs on Stan, but he doesn't hesitate leaving the rest of the captives in their cells. Hap takes them to the bedroom where they put Evelyn and tells them,
I'm going to lock the door, and we'll be watching the monitor until her condition improves.
Once Hap and Stan leave, Homer tells Owe that instead of doing the movements correctly, they should purposely sabotage them so Hap would look mad, get arrested, and they'll go free. Owe disagrees.
If we don't try to help her, then we aren't who we say we are.
Now in agreement, Homer and Owe take their stances and begin the movements as Hap and Stan watch from the other room. As they continue, the power begins to flicker throughout Hap's house.
What's going on? It's working. It's working.
They continue, and as a tear runs down the left side of Evelyn's face, the power flickers and fully cuts out from the house. Hap brings up a thermal image camera as Homer and Owe continue. Only a minute later...
You're finally here. She grabbed my hand.
Jesse and Steve stare at Owe unblinkingly as she continues. Evelyn tells Owe and Homer of a time when she was swimming in the ocean as a child, and the water pulled her under. As she left her body, she saw a white light that she moved towards, and at the center of that light was a little girl. The girl said to her,
One day, you will help two captive angels.
even though it will be very hard and painful, she needs to stay alive to give them something. A moth flew from the girl's mouth into Evelyn, which she kept all these years to finally give to them. She tells them,
It's almost over, but I get to hold my stand one more time.
Finally, after Homer and OA vow to protect it with their lives, Evelyn pushes herself up and shows them the fifth movement. Once shown the movement, OA and Homer touch each other for the first time. Meanwhile, Stan, astonished to see his wife move on her own for the first time in years, rushes in to hold Evelyn, leaving his gun behind. As him and Evelyn embrace, Hap walks in and shoots Stan in the back, killing both him and Evelyn. He tells OA to get away from Homer or he'll shoot him. Hap drags OA out of the room, locks the door, and injects something into OA, which knocks her out. Shortly thereafter, OA wakes up in the back of Hap's car. He stops, drags OA out of the car, throws her to the ground, and tells her he's going to leave her as he found her. Even if she finds her way back, they'll be gone.
In another dimension. All of us.
The sky is so big. Trees. And a road. Going somewhere.
And I think of Homer and I grab onto him and he kicks me away and he's in the car and he's so fast. I run to get him and I can't catch him. I really run so hard and I can't catch him and I scream, "Come back!"
Just as she finishes this final part of her story,
Back! Oh my God.
oh shit. Nancy puts her jacket around OA and walks her out of the house and towards their place in yet another example of how she refuses to ask questions in order to understand a situation. Later on, her and Abel knock on their neighbor's door to talk, but Mr. Winchell tells them to just leave. As they walk away, French runs after them,
Mr. and Mrs. Johnson.
introduces himself,
You were at the Olive Garden.
and tells them he's going to prove OA's story was true.
She told you?
Later on, Nancy and Abel have dozens of reporters outside their house in a callback to when OA first got home. This time, however, Nancy and Abel are trying to get away. They check into a hotel, and after getting a cot set up for OA to sleep, Abel finally breaks down. OA appears to realize how much her silence has hurt the two people that consider themselves her parents, so she starts.
The house was by a mine.
She continues to tell them of the cage she was held in, the bed she slept on, or sometimes under, and how they ate food made for animals. She also tells of the young man that was next to her.
We fell in love. Do you want me to stop?
The next morning, Nancy watches Prairie sleep, and her side of the bed is still made up. She pulls a paper out of her wallet and wakes Abel up.
You asked if she left a note.
Abel takes the paper from Nancy's hand and reads it to himself. When he finishes, he looks Nancy in the eyes and then walks out of the room. Nancy follows him into the lobby, asking him to return to the room.
I'm busy, Naps.
We can't talk here.
That's right.
First, Nancy claims she didn't tell him about the note because if there was a note, the police wouldn't look for her. Next, it's down to Prairie saying that she was looking for her father when Abel is her father.
You lied about the note because you were worried I would be hurt by her choice of words? She disappeared. And you thought that's what I would have on my mind?
Finally, Nancy gives Abel the real reason she couldn't bring herself to tell him about the note.
It all happened because I chose her. You wanted to adopt that little boy, but I wanted her.
In the end, Nancy feels it's her own pride and her own need to be loved that drove Prairie away, and that's why she couldn't tell Abel about the note. Shifting focus, Steve and French are trying to find information regarding OA's story. Steve is calling the ALS Society, and French is looking online. Their relationship is significantly better than it was.
We got this.
Nothing is coming up when they try to Google search specific names, so Steve suggests word combinations. Finally, French finds a YouTube video, a blonde woman playing a violin in a New York subway with "blind" in the title.
Yes.
That night, French makes his way to the Johnson residence, which still appears empty. He breaks in and goes to OA's room. In her closet, he finds her violin case. When he looks under her bed, he finds an Amazon box. When he removes the hoodie of the wolf that she purchased in Champion, French finds several books. One on Russian oligarchs, one on near-death experiences, a book on angels, and the Iliad by Homer. Finding these books overwhelmed French. He goes to the bathroom, splashes some water on his face, and looks at himself in the mirror. A moment later, he thinks he sees Homer looking back at him. He takes the box of books, rushes downstairs, and runs right into the FBI therapist, Raheem. Raheem asks him his name and pieces him as one of the boys she told her story to. He brings up the idea of secondhand trauma.
When you take somebody else's pain so they can survive, that's what you did.
Whether her stories were real or not, Raheem tells French he helped Prairie just by listening to her story. French gathers Steve, Buck, and Jesse at his workplace and shows them the books he found.
She told us a story. It just, wasn't true.
Buck grabs the one on the angels and tells him he's keeping that one. Jesse and Steve walk away, and French says he's got to start his shift. An unspecified amount of time later, we get a gorgeous overhead shot of the neighborhood that's reminiscent of the opening credits shot in episode 1. We cut to OA and Abel planting flowers in the garden. OA says she took her pills on an empty stomach and is nauseated, so she leaves Abel to finish by himself. As she draws a bath, we see that she has an ankle monitor for house arrest. Meanwhile, back at school, Principal Gilchrist opens Betty's desk for her to clear it out. Apparently, there was a hearing with the school board, and Betty was let go.
That's a cool box.
Oh, I bought it at the Container Store. I really like that store.
So I had this entire rant written up about how these awesome and creative writers couldn't come up with anything less generic sounding than the Container Store, but I decided to Google it just in case. Turns out it's real. Sorry, the Container Store, but you guys really do need a less generic sounding name. Anyways, moving on. French plugs his phone in the school cafeteria and gives himself a moment to take in the sunlight through the large windows and watch the leaves on the tree flow with the wind. Skipping ahead to lunch that day, Jesse is talking to his friend that made something for him.
No, dude, I got something made for you.
Sorry, his friend that had something made for him.
Isn't it dope?
I actually love this pillow. Meanwhile, French is eating with his jock buddies. Steve and Angie are officially a couple. Buck is sitting with what appears to be an artistic and creative group. All in all, a nice normal lunch break for a high school. Back at the Johnson residence, OA has fallen asleep in the bathtub. Moments later, she's startled awake and her nose begins to bleed. After dressing, she runs downstairs as Abel is coming inside.
I had the dream again. I know what it is now.
Abel stands aside and lets OA go. As BBA is finishing up her last goodbyes in the halls, and OA is running as hard as she can, we cut back to Jesse's friend in the lunchroom for some friendly banter between them.
Oh, what, you saying I'm short?
Yeah.
Jesse's friend looks out the window into the distance, and as it pulls into a close-up of his face, there's a shimmer signifying that nothing is going to be the same ever again. As he looks out the windows, he sees a kid with a vest and an assault rifle walking towards the cafe. Realizing what he's seeing, he grabs Jesse and pulls both of them to the floor. Jesse starts laughing, assuming his friend is playing around. Moments later, every student in the cafeteria begins to scramble. They throw themselves onto the exit door, but it's locked with a padlock and refuses to budge. Under the tables, Steve grabs onto Angie and stares directly into her eyes. Buck attempts the door, but once he realizes it won't open, he rushes under another table. OA continues to run as fast as she can. As BBA comes down the stairs, she sees a bunch of kids running towards the exit, where Principal Gilchrist is ushering them out. Upon seeing Betty, he tells her to hurry up. BBA realizes what's happening.
Oh my God.
She runs to the cafeteria. Meanwhile, Jesse and French are hiding under the tables as the shooter walks into the room. All the kids scramble and hide under the tables just as BBA gets there. Steve pulls himself forward, looks over, and makes eye contact with Buck. Buck looks to his left, sees Betty standing there. Steve looks to French, at the shooter, then over to Jesse. Knowingly, Jesse stops shaking and gives a nod. The four boys jump to their feet, and BBA runs beside them. The five of them start to move. After they complete the movements, it pans to the one casualty from the gunman. OA, just outside the window, where the glass is broken into 5 separate pieces.
5 by 5.
As the ambulance wheels away onto it, she removes the oxygen mask.
You did it. I have the will.
As the ambulance drives away, Steve feels something is happening. He chases the ambulance but can't catch up.
Angel! Take me with you!
And the season ends with...
They said it would be invisible. Like jumping into an invisible current that just
carries you away.
So continuing our trend, let's ask this for the last time. Is she lying? This episode gives both sides of that coin. Did French and Steve not specifically search for Homer near-death experience like OA did in episode 1? It feels like they should have gotten more than just a blonde, blind woman playing a violin in a subway. Additionally, they purposely show French finding OA's violin case in her closet, something Hap probably threw out once he abducted her, and he certainly didn't give it back to her when he set her free. Between that and the books under her bed, there's definitely a clear case that she may be lying. But for now, let's just move on. There is one minor question I wanted to know, but I probably won't get an answer for, and that's, was the little girl Evelyn saw in her NDE Katoon? On one hand, OA mentioned in Forking Paths,
In Renata's NDE, her guardian told her one of the side effects of dimensional travel is amnesia.
thus implying each one of them has a specific and different guardian. On the other hand, the timeline seems to fit, assuming a being like Katoon ages similarly to us. In each of OA's NDEs, Katoon has always been an older woman, similar to Evelyn's age. Regardless of if it was Katoon or not, this brings up the biggest question of destiny so far. Way back when Evelyn was a little girl, she was told,
One day you will help 2 captive angels.
This implies that Nina really had no say in her life. From the moment she was born, every step she took, every choice she made, and every crossroad she encountered was already set in motion for her to be right there and then. I have a lot more to say regarding predestination, choice, and fate once we get to part 2, so I'm going to leave it here for now. Moving on to more of a minor detail, I think it's very telling on who comes up the stairs at the end of OA's story. We have Mr. Vu, Nancy and Abel, the Winchells, Principal Gilchrist, and even Jesse's sister. The one person who isn't there is French's mom. No real point here, except to further our understanding of how much French's mom really doesn't care. Next, let's talk a bit about Steve. It appears he's back in school, even though he should have been at Asheville. There's a couple of reasons why he isn't, though. Once his parents caught him at the abandoned house, it's possible they found out what the guys from Asheville had done, aka sold him to a stranger, so they canceled it altogether. There's also the possibility that he felt hurt by his parents, so he decided to stay with his girlfriend Angie. His exact age isn't really given, but if he's 18 or older, he can technically live wherever he wants. As coupley as him and Angie are at lunch, it wouldn't surprise me if that's the case. That would explain why he's still in school on the day of the shooting as well. There's an unknown time jump from when French found the books and to when the shooting happens. In that time, there was a school hearing for Betty. OA had gone to court over her actions at the abandoned house, and she got placed on house arrest with an ankle monitor. Also, she's helping Abel with gardening at the end, something that usually occurs in spring, yet throughout the show they mention how cold things are, like it's winter. Moving on, I wasn't going to mention this as I don't have much to say other than bringing it up, but what was Rahim doing at the Johnson residence when French was there? The next thing I want to touch on is the shimmer that occurs around Jesse's friend when he notices the gunman. Unfortunately, this is another mystery that never gets resolved. There's several theories around what it means. Personally, I think it's some kind of break. In other words, it was at that specific moment where the timeline breaks and there's 2 possible outcomes. 1, the shooter is there and shoots up the school and the cafeteria, or 2, it happens as we see it, they do the movements, and the gunman gets taken down. Going back to my video on Forking Paths, it's implied that all realities happen all at once, but are inaccessible due to the choices that we make. In other words, there's a version of their world where the Crestwood Five either never met or never listened to OA. Unfortunately, if the show never gets its part 3, 4, or 5, it seems like we may never know the answer. This leads me to my next point.
All 5 of you must work together as one to avert a great evil.
Is the school shooting the great evil she was meant to intervene? Personally, I doubt it. Don't get me wrong, a school shooting is detestable and there's no defense for it. In the grand scheme of things, however, it's relatively minor. From OA's dream about her father with the 21 wax candles, she's crawling on the face of the Statue of Liberty, so personally think that this great evil Katoon talks about is still to come. What if the great evil she's talking about is an extinction level event? Going further, what if it isn't just that, but an extinction event across all parallel universes? Personally, I have my doubts that a being like Khatun would consider several human deaths as a great evil. Finally, I want to get meta for a moment and talk about why this script was so hard for me to write and why it took so long to make this video. If it's not already obvious, the final scene greatly affects me in several ways. First of all, the movements themselves. The energy, the passion, the execution of the movements speak to me on a level most entertainment can rarely reach. There's maybe a couple video games, a movie here and there, and a very small handful of shows that touch me the way this show does. And their execution of the movements are a great example of how a piece of art can transcend the medium that it's presented on. The second reason this was hard to make is a lot more obvious: the subject matter itself. The idea of a kid coming to school with a gun terrifies me, regardless of the fact that I haven't been in school for over 2 decades now. I live in Connecticut, and on December 14th, 2012, I was only a half-hour drive from the Sandy Hook Elementary School. I also worked in a mall, a place known for high foot traffic. Fiction or not, someone bringing a gun to a school is not a subject I find easy to talk about. Fortunately for me, there's only one other episode of the OA that I'm going to have trouble talking about, and I'll cross that bridge when I get to it. I only have one thing to talk about in the spoiler section, and that's regarding the books under OA's bed. We find out from Abel in part 2 that he ordered the books so that they can talk about everything as a family. I take issue with this, as OA hadn't told Nancy or Abel anything until they were already out of the house and spending time in a hotel. There's no way Abel would have gotten the books, as he didn't know the story until after they had already left. Perhaps there is a time mechanic that we don't know about, and that's why Raheem was there, but for now, we really have no answers. Phew, what a season finale. Sorry this took so long to get done. If you've watched to this point, thanks. Feel free to share, like, subscribe if you liked it. Before I get into part 2, I may work on a couple other things. Otherwise, have a great day. Peace.